The pipeline company crossed his field without permission. One old letter made them pay. For 25 years the letter came in a shoebox. That was the first surprise. Walter Mercer found it on a Tuesday morning in March of 1987, going through his late father's papers in the back bedroom of the farmhouse. The box had sat in the closet for 11 months. Walter had been putting it off. His father had died the previous April. There was no rush, he told himself. The papers weren't going anywhere. He was 54 years old. Had farmed the same 220 acres in Caldwell County, Missouri, since 1961. Took it over when his father's hands got too stiff to grip a wrench. The land sat just north of a county road called Pickett Lane. Flat-bottom ground, good for corn and soybeans, with a creek cutting the southwest corner. He knew every foot of it. Knew where the ground stayed wet into May. Knew where the deer crossed. Knew the exact spot the tractor always bogged after a hard rain. The shoebox smelled like dust and old tobacco. His father had rolled his own for 60 years. Walter sat on the edge of the bed and went through it slow. Bank statements. A marriage certificate from 1929. Photographs of people he didn't recognize. A pocket knife with a cracked bone handle. And near the bottom, folded in thirds, a letter on yellowed paper. The letterhead read Continental Gas Transmission Company. Dated September 18, 1961. Walter almost didn't read it. He'd seen plenty of company letters in his life. Most of them wanted money, or land, or both. But this one had his father's handwriting in the margin. 3 words. Do not sign. Underlined twice. The ink had faded to brown. The pencil pressure had nearly torn the paper. So he read it. The letter was an offer. Continental wanted to run a natural gas pipeline across the southwest corner of the Mercer property, 30 inches in diameter, buried 4 feet down. They were offering a one-time payment of $1,200 for a permanent easement across 1.8 acres. The letter was polite. It explained that the pipeline would serve the growing energy needs of the region. It mentioned eminent domain twice. The implication was clear. Sign, or we take it anyway. His father hadn't signed. Walter set the letter down on the quilt. He knew the pipeline. Everybody in Caldwell County knew the pipeline. It had been running gas under the southwest corner of his land for as long as he could remember. There was a yellow marker post by the creek, a sign that said call before digging. He'd plowed around it his whole adult life. He'd always assumed his father had taken the deal. Taken the $1,200 and let the company bury its pipe and moved on. He hadn't. Walter read the 3 words again. Do not sign. He tried to remember his father ever mentioning it. Couldn't. The old man had kept things close. 60 years of farming had taught him that a quiet man gives nothing away. Whatever his father had known in 1961, he'd taken most of it to the grave. All he'd left was a letter in a shoebox and a warning in the margin. Walter folded it back into thirds and put it in his shirt pocket. He finished the rest of the box. There was nothing else about the pipeline. No second letter. No contract. No check stub. Nothing that bothered him more than it should have. The next morning he drove into Kingston, the county seat. He went to the recorder of deeds and asked to see every easement filed against his property. The clerk was a woman named Pauline Schott. She'd held the job for 23 years. She knew the Mercer name. She pulled the file in about 10 minutes. It was thin. There was no pipeline easement. Walter asked her to check again. She checked again. There were 2 easements on file. One for a power line, granted in 1948. One for a drainage ditch, granted in 1953. Nothing from Continental Gas. Nothing from 1961. Nothing about a pipeline at all. Pauline told him that was unusual. Pipeline companies always recorded their easements. It was how they protected their right to be there. A recorded easement was permanent. It ran with the land. It survived sales, deaths, divisions, without a recorded easement. A pipeline was just a pipe in the ground. Trespassing, technically, she'd worked the deeds office 23 years. She'd never seen one missing before. Walter asked her to print him a copy of the search. She did. She signed it and stamped it with the county seal. He folded it and put it in the same shirt pocket as the letter. He drove home the long way, past the creek, past the yellow marker post. He stopped the truck and got out and stood looking at it. The post had been there 26 years. He'd believed it had a right to be there for 26 years. Everybody had. The sign was faded, but readable. Call before digging. A phone number with a Tulsa area code. The pipe in the ground belonged to nobody's permission. He didn't do anything for 2 weeks. A man doesn't pick a fight with a gas company on a whim. Walter thought about it during planting. Thought about it on the tractor, going up and down the rows, the diesel engine droning under him and the dust rising behind. The pipeline carried gas under pressure across his land. If it had no easement, then Continental had been using his property for 26 years without paying for it, without permission, after his father had specifically told them no. The arithmetic of it kept turning over in his head. 26 years. He didn't know what a fair yearly payment would have been. But 26 of anything added up. He talked it over with nobody. His wife had passed in 1983. His daughter lived 2 hours east in Columbia and had her own life. So he talked it over with himself, the way men who farm alone learn to do. He weighed it against what it might cost. A gas company had lawyers on salary. Walter had a checking account and 220 acres and a stubborn streak he'd inherited along with the land. But the 3 words in the margin kept pulling at him. Do not sign. His father had been a careful man. He didn't underline things twice for no reason. Whatever he'd seen in that offer in 1961, he'd seen it clear enough to leave a warning for whoever opened the box. Walter decided he owed it to the old man to at least find out what the warning was worth. There was something else, too, that he didn't say out loud, even to himself. The pipe had been under his land his whole adult life, and he'd never questioned it. He'd plowed around the post. He'd called the Tulsa number once, years back, before draining the low corner, and a man had come out and marked the line with little flags. Walter had thanked him. All that time he'd been treating the company's pipe like it had every right to be there. And it hadn't. It had been a guest that never asked and never paid, sitting at his table for 26 years. He called a lawyer in Kansas City, a man named Edward Brandt, who'd handled a fence dispute for Walter's cousin a few years back. Brandt listened to the whole story. The shoebox, the letter, the missing easement, the yellow post by the creek, the certified search with Pauline Schott's signature on it. He asked Walter to mail him copies of everything. Walter did. Drove to the post office and sent it certified. Return receipt requested. 3 days later, Brandt called back. He told Walter the situation was interesting. He didn't say more than that. Lawyers learn not to promise. What Brandt found over the next 4 months changed everything. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But it changed the ground under the whole question. Continental Gas Transmission had been bought in 1971 by a larger firm called Midwestern Energy Partners. Midwestern had been bought in 1981 by an even larger one, Allied Pipeline Holdings. Each sale had transferred thousands of easements at once, bundled together in long schedules nobody read line by line. Each company assumed the Mercer easement existed because the pipeline existed. Why would a pipeline be there without one? Nobody had ever checked. The original 1961 paperwork had been filed in a box in a warehouse in St. Louis. Then it had been lost. Then the warehouse had been sold. Then it had been emptied. The box was gone. The pipeline was real. The legal right to it was not. Brandt drove out to the farm in July. He wanted to see it himself. Walter walked him down to the creek and showed him the yellow post. Brandt stood there a long while. He took photographs. He paced off the distance from the post to the property line. Then they went back to the house, and Brandt explained the law at Walter's kitchen table. A pipeline company that occupies land without an easement is trespassing. Continuous trespass. Every day the gas flowed was a new day of using land they had no right to use. The remedy wasn't just back payment. Under Missouri law, the landowner could demand the trespass stop. He could demand they remove the pipeline. Or he could negotiate. The leverage was total. Allied needed the pipeline to stay where it was. It connected a compressor station in the north of the state to a distribution hub in the south. Rerouting a 30-inch transmission line around 1.8 acres meant digging up the pipe, building a bypass, pressure testing new steel, and shutting down the flow for weeks. It was a project measured in millions. Allied would pay almost anything to avoid it. Walter asked what almost anything meant. Brandt didn't answer right away. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. He said it depended on how patient Walter was willing to be. The first letter to Allied Pipeline Holdings went out in August of 1987. Brandt drafted it. It was 4 sentences long. It stated that Allied was operating a natural gas pipeline across the Mercer property without a recorded easement. It requested that Allied produce documentation of its legal right to be there. It gave them 30 days. It was signed by Edward Brandt, attorney at law. Allied's response took 41 days. It was a form letter. It thanked Mr. Mercer for his correspondence and stated that the easement was a matter of record and that Allied's right to operate the pipeline was well established. It did not include a copy of the easement. It could not. The easement did not exist. Brandt wrote back. This time he included the certified search from the Caldwell County Recorder of Deeds. Pauline Schott's signature was on it. The county seal was on it. The search showed no pipeline easement of any kind, granted at any time, by anyone in the Mercer family. Brandt asked Allied to either produce the document or begin planning removal of the pipeline within 90 days. The form letters stopped after that. A man named Gerald Vance called Brandt's office in October. He was Allied's regional counsel. He flew in from Tulsa. He rented a car at the Kansas City airport and drove an hour and a half to Brandt's office downtown. He was not friendly, and he was not unfriendly. He was a man whose job was to make problems go away for the least money possible. He'd done it for 20 years. He sat across from Brandt and Walter in a conference room with a view of the river and laid out a position. Allied had operated the pipeline in good faith for decades. The missing paperwork was a clerical matter. A filing error from a company that no longer existed. He offered to record a proper easement immediately and pay Walter $5,000 for the inconvenience. He said it the way a man says a number he expects to be accepted. Brandt thanked him for coming. Then, he explained the situation back to Vance. The pipeline had no easement. It never had. The landowner's father had explicitly declined the easement in 1961, and there was a letter in his own handwriting proving it. Brandt slid a photocopy across the table. Do not sign, underlined twice. This was not a clerical matter. This was 26 years of continuous trespass on which the company and its predecessors had never paid a single dollar. Walter was within his rights to demand removal. A 30-inch transmission line, buried 4 feet down, through pressure-tested steel. Vance looked at the photocopy for a while. He set it down. He asked what Walter wanted. Walter spoke for the first time in the meeting. He said he didn't want the pipeline gone. He wasn't a fool. The gas had to go somewhere, and the pipe was already in the ground, and digging it up wouldn't do anybody any good, including him. What he wanted was to be paid for the use of his land, fairly every year, the way it should have been from the start, back in 1961, before his father said no. Vance asked what fairly meant. Brant slid a second piece of paper across the table. The number on it was not enormous. That was the strategy. Brant had calculated what a fair annual easement payment would have been in 1961, adjusted for the decades of inflation since, plus a penalty for the years of unpaid use. The figure he proposed was an annual payment, not a lump sum, $4,800 a year, adjusted upward every 5 years to track inflation, for as long as the pipeline remained in the ground, plus $38,000 in back payment for the 26 years already taken. Vance read it twice. He said the annual structure was unusual. Companies preferred lump sums, clean, done, off the books. One check and the matter closed forever. Walter knew that. That was exactly why he wanted the opposite. A lump sum could be spent and forgotten. An annual payment was a debt the company carried forever. Every year the pipeline stayed, the bill came due. Walter understood something Vance was hoping he wouldn't. The company would never move the pipeline. Moving it cost millions. It would be there in 20 years, in 40. The annual payment turned his father's underlined do not sign into a small permanent tax on a company that had thought it was getting the land for free. It would outlive Walter. It would outlive Vance. It would keep coming due long after both of them were gone. Vance folded the paper and put it in his breast pocket. He said he'd take it back to Tulsa. The negotiation took until February of 1988. It went in rounds, by mail and by telephone, each one slow. Allied's first counter was a lump sum of $40,000 and nothing more. A single check, the easement recorded, the matter closed. Brant declined. Allied came back in December with $75,000. A bigger check, same structure. Brant declined again. Each time, the leverage held. Brant never raised his voice and never raised his number much. He didn't have to. Allied could end the negotiation only 2 ways: pay the annual structure Walter wanted, or move the pipeline at a cost Vance estimated in an unguarded moment on the telephone in January at over $2 million. Walter heard about that estimate from Brant that same afternoon. He was standing in the kitchen when the call came. He looked out the window toward the creek while Brant told him. $2 million. To move a pipe off 1.8 acres. He told Brant to hold the line. Allied tried other things in those months. They sent a surveyor out to the property without calling first. Walter found the man near the creek with a transit and a clipboard and asked him to leave. The man left. They sent a second letter suggesting the 1961 document Walter's father had refused to sign might constitute evidence of an agreement anyway. Brant wrote back 2 sentences explaining that a refusal to sign is the opposite of an agreement, and that he would be happy to make that argument to a judge. They sent a third letter raising the lump sum to $95,000. Brant declined. What none of it changed was the central fact. The company had no easement. It never had, and the longer the matter dragged, the more days of trespass piled up, each one strengthening Walter's position instead of weakening it. Time was the one thing a farmer had more of than a gas company. Vance understood that eventually. The last phone call before the signing was short. He didn't argue. He asked Brandt to send the final language. They signed in February of 1988. The annual payment was set at $4,500, adjusted every 5 years to track inflation. Back payment of $33,000 for the years already taken. And the easement was finally, properly recorded at the Caldwell County Recorder of Deeds, where Pauline Schott filed it herself and stamped it with a seal. Walter's father had been right to refuse. He just refused too early to collect. The first check arrived in March of 1988. $4,500. Walter deposited it at the bank in Kingston and said nothing to anybody. The teller didn't ask. The yellow marker post still stood by the creek. The pipeline still carried gas under pressure, north to south, the way it always had. Nothing about the land looked different. The corn went in that spring, same as every spring. The only change was invisible. Once a year, a company in Tulsa wrote a check to a farmer in Caldwell County for the right to keep a pipe in his ground. The back payment, the $33,000, he used carefully. He paid off the note on a combine. He put a new roof on the machine shed. He set the rest aside. He didn't tell people where it came from. A man's business was his own. That was something else his father had taught him without ever saying it. The adjustments came on schedule. In 1993, the payment rose to $5,200. In 1998 to $6,100. In 2003 to $7,400. Each 5 years, a letter came from Tulsa with the new figure, calculated against the inflation index, exactly as the contract specified. Walter checked the math every time. It was always right. The company had learned not to make mistakes on the Mercer account. Allied Pipeline Holdings was bought in 2006 by a firm called Gulf States Energy. The new owner inherited the easement along with the pipeline, bundled into a schedule of thousands of properties, the same way the easement had once been lost. But this one was different. This one their lawyers actually reviewed. They found it ironclad, properly recorded, inflation adjusted, binding on all successors. It had been written by a man who understood exactly what he was protecting against. There was a note in the Gulf States file, Brandt heard later, flagging the Mercer easement as one not to be challenged. Word of it got around, the quiet way things get around in farm country. Not the details. Walter never gave the details, but a neighbor 2 farms over, a man named Royce Tillman, had the same yellow posts crossing his back 40. And one evening at the grain elevator, he asked Walter straight out whether it was true the gas company was paying him every year. Walter said it was. Tillman asked how a man got that. Walter told him to dig out his father's papers and look for what wasn't recorded at the courthouse. Tillman did. His easement was there, filed proper in 1961, signed by his own father. He'd taken the $1,200. There was nothing to be done. The difference between the 2 farms came down to 3 pencil words and a margin. Gerald Vance retired in 2001. He never came back to Caldwell County. He'd flown in once, offered $5,000, and flown home. The pipeline he tried to settle for the price of a used truck cost his company, by 2012, more than $130,000 in cumulative payments. The structure Brandt designed had done exactly what it was built to do. Every year the bill came due. Every year the company paid. The pipe never moved. The payments never stopped. Brandt himself retired in 1999, but he kept the Mercer file on his shelf as a teaching example. He'd tell younger lawyers the same thing every time. The client's father won the case in 1961. We just collected on it 26 years later. Walter farmed the land until 2009. He was 76. His knees had gone the way his father's hands had gone. He sold the 220 acres to his daughter Carol, who'd married a man named Doug who knew machinery and didn't mind the work. The easement transferred with the land, the way easements do. Carol kept getting the annual checks. By then, the payment had reached $8,900. She used the first one to fix the barn roof. Walter laughed when she told him, said the pipe had bought 2 roofs now. Walter died in the spring of 2014. He was 81. He'd lived to the same age his father had. Carol found the shoebox when she went through his papers, in the same back bedroom, going through it slow the way he once had. The letter was still in it. Continental Gas Transmission. September 18, 1961, her grandfather's handwriting in the margin. Do not sign. Underlined twice. The brown ink, the pressure marks where the pencil nearly tore through. She understood it now in a way her father had spent 2 weeks understanding back in 1987. The whole thing was in those 3 words. A man in 1961 had read an offer to bury a pipe under his land for $1,200 and had decided, for reasons he never explained to anyone, that the answer was no. He'd been right. He'd been right for 53 years and counting, and he'd never seen a dollar of it. Carol had the letter framed, plain wood frame, glass over the yellowed paper. She hung it in the farmhouse hallway, by the back door, where everybody who came in or went out would pass it. Doug asked her once why she put it where the mud and the boots were instead of in the front room. She said because that's the door they actually used. That's the door her father had used. That's where it belonged. The pipeline is still there. Different company. Same pipe. Same yellow post by the creek with the faded sign and the Tulsa phone number. The checks still come every year, larger now than they've ever been, to a farm that was almost taken for $1,200 in the fall of 1961. Carol still farms the land. Doug still keeps the machinery running. The corn still goes in every spring on the flat-bottom ground, and the tractor still bogs in the same wet spot after a hard rain. One old letter made them pay for 25 years. It's still making them pay. Still in the ground. Still on the books. Still just a piece of yellowed paper and a man who wouldn't sign.